Hello folks, back out in the garage today with a bench full of parts for my current project, which is a winch bumper for my Jeep Wrangler. So I have a bunch of stuff here for the project on my bench. Mainly what I have here is a DIY kit from JCR Offroad. It is the DIY bumper kit for the JK Wranglers. And it just comes as a bunch of pre-cut pieces of steel that you just bend and then weld together. This bar does not come with the kit. I purchased this separately, and I also have a winch that I'm going to be mounting on it at the end. I don't know if I'll get through the whole project today. I probably will not, in which case I will probably make this a multi-part video, but I'll get as far done as I can today, and I'm going to take you along for the ride. Alright, I got the bench cleared off a little bit. This is the main structure of the bumper, and with this JCR kit, they cut slots in the main pieces, and they just leave little tabs left, and you basically just bend it into shape and then weld all the joints out. So it's a pretty straightforward kit. Hopefully it's fairly easy to get everything square and everything lined up, but the instructions are pretty straightforward. Shouldn't be a big deal. As I showed before, I did get a bar to go on the top of the bumper. I just bought that separately at Summit Racing. They just sell them pre-bent. I don't currently have a tubing bender or anything, and that bar wasn't terribly expensive, so just makes it simpler. I'm also going to cut some holes in this to mount some small lights that I will power off of the fog light wiring on the Jeep. And I bought some just fog light extension harnesses, and I'm just going to cut those and wire those to the new lights that I bought. That way I will still have the stock harness connector that I can just plug and unplug, and I don't have to cut anything on the stock wiring. But for now, I'm just going to get started bending this into shape and see how that goes. Alright, so I got the first piece bent up. It's just a matter of clamping it to the table and then grabbing the end with a crescent wrench and just bending it straight up, and then just checking that it was at 90 degrees with a square, and that was that. So I'll move over to the other side. Once it's clamped to the table, just a matter of bending it up into position. I got to move the clamps a little bit so I can get to full 90 degrees. And that's pretty much perfect. But obviously once I get the other pieces bent up to meet this, I might have to take a tiny bit of tweaking to get it perfect, and then I'll tack it together. Alright, so I got the main part of the bumper bent into shape, and it's just a matter of basically clamping it to the table and then gripping the sides, like I said, with a crescent wrench or pliers or something, and just bending it up into place. It does require a pretty decent amount of force, so you want to make sure it's either clamped really, really solid to the table, or just held, some way really well. And in fact, my table is on casters, but even with those locked, the whole table was wanting to tip backwards, so I actually had to press it straight up against the wall so the wall would kind of hold it. I mean, it's not super difficult to do, but it does take enough force that you have to kind of keep that in mind of how you're going to be bending it. It comes with these gussets that just slide into place. They're a little bit snug. I don't have them seated completely yet, but I'm going to grab my dead blow hammer, tap those into place, and then for the corners, I'll just have to squeeze those together and get those tacked up. So that's what I'm going to do now. Seat those gussets, get them squared and tacked in place, tack all the corners, and then move on from there. Okay, so I've got the main body of the bumper squared up and all tacked together, and I'll get all the rest of the parts laid out, tacked up, and basically have the bumper completely ready to go, and tested for fit and all that kind of stuff before I weld everything out. So right now I have the main body together, and now I'm going to assemble these wings. That's what these extra pieces are that it came with. These are wings that go on the sides of the bumper. So I'll get those bent, tacked together, and fitted, and we'll keep going. Alright, so I got the two wings tacked up. These were a little bit more tricky to bend and get to fit properly. This piece has a bunch of angles other than 90 degrees, but even more so than that. Once this piece was bent all the way around, there was a pretty big gap here, so I had to do some clamping and kind of get everything held together to get it tacked up. But they're both together, tacked up. They both fit reasonably well on the ends of the bumper. So now the trick is just going to be get those aligned really, really well on the ends and even, so that they don't look crooked or anything. And I'll get those tacked up. I also have these eyes for the shackles, and these had a pretty heavy layer of mill scale on them, so I got those cleaned up. So I'll get the placement of those lined up and get those tacked in place as well. And then I'll do a quick test fit on the Jeep, just make sure everything is looking straight and all that. And then I'll just get started with just welding everything out. And then the last thing I'll weld on is that bar that goes over the top. I'm going to do that last because I want to be able to set the winch in place and just kind of decide just exactly where I want that bar to go before I get that welded on. Alright, so I got the little wings welded in place, well, tacked in place, and I did have to actually tack this part from the inside so that I could grind the tacks off of the top here so I could get this to fit up flush, and the same thing on the other side. Not a big deal, but I just put the tacks on the inside so this wouldn't spring apart, then ground out these tacks, fit this up, tacked it together in a couple places. So main part of the bumper is actually all tacked up. I test fitted on the Jeep, everything looks good. So I still have to get these tacked on the front. And then this bumper, I don't know if I mentioned this yet, does come with a lower skid that comes down from the bumper down to kind of the crash bar area, and that just gets bolted in place. There's some mounting tabs that have to get kind of bent to the right angle, and then it just bolts on. I'll probably do that last once everything is done. This is completely done, mounted up and everything. I'll bend those tabs and kind of tweak them until it lines up just right, and then that'll be good to go also. Now, as far as welding this all out, it's going to be a little bit interesting because these nice outside corners here will be easy to fill with a weld and make look kind of decent, but then you have these areas where it's kind of bent, and this just real complicated area here where there's a big hole and all this kind of weird stuff comes together just because of the way this has to all fit together with just a bunch of bent pieces. So I'll probably put some more tacks in these long spans with TIG just to keep these gaps from opening up because they are really straight right now. Then I'm kind of on the fence on whether or not I'll just MIG weld it out or if I'll just do it all in TIG because I'm already here with the TIG welder. But for now, I think the next step is probably going to be to go ahead and get these tacked in place, and at that point that might be all I do for today. I might call it a day on this project. If so, I'll see how much footage I have. Maybe this will become a two-parter, and maybe not. Alright, so I got the shackle tabs welded on. I went ahead and did that with TIG, and there's a couple of slots and seams in the top of the bumper, and I went ahead and did that with TIG also, just because I had the TIG set up already. So like I said, I just went ahead and welded those things up with TIG, and now I've got the MIG welder set up, and I'm just going to run over the rest of the joints with the MIG welder. It's a lot faster. Alright, so I got the bumper all welded out, and I was just getting ready to weld this pipe in place. I got the spots all marked on both sides, and I was all ready to get it tacked in place. But then I started thinking it might be easier to cut the holes for the lights right now versus once that bar is actually in place. I'm going to actually cut some holes right about here on each side and have some flush mount LEDs to mount in the bumper there. So I think I'll get that measured and get those holes cut first, and then I will get the bar welded on, and that should be the last of the welding. Unless I decide to just weld on some kind of a bracket for the winch fair lead versus just getting a mounting plate that has one built in. It's probably going to kind of come down to whether or not I have some steel laying around that I can use to do that. My stock of just like random bits and pieces of steel is actually getting pretty low right now, so if it's a matter of going out and buying some steel anyways to make a bracket, I could just order a cheap one online. So I'll check and see what I have, but if it turns out that I have something, I may just weld on some small brackets for the fair lead. Otherwise, the bar is the last thing to get welded. But like I said before that, I'm going to go ahead and get the holes measured and cut for the lights. Alright, I got the location for the first light marked out. Like I said, they're flush mount LED lights, and the instructions say to use a 1 3/4 inch hole saw. And I could do that, but what's the fun in that when you have circle templates and a plasma cutter? So I'm going to get those holes cut and get the lights kind of test fitted. I'm not going to obviously mount them yet until I get it all painted and everything, but get the holes cut, make sure everything lines up, and keep going. Alright, so I got the holes cut and the lights just kind of set in place just to make sure everything fits. And everything's good to go. Lights stand out pretty bad right now, but once the bumper's painted black, they won't stick out quite as bad, and I think it's going to look pretty good. And honestly, really the only reason I did the lights is because I have factory fog lights, so there's a harness there, there's a switch in the cab for it. Just seemed like a waste to not use that. I already got the location for the bar marked out on the top, so just got to get that tacked on and welded out. Alright, so the bumper is finished. I just have to get it cleaned up and painted, and once that's done, I'll get it bolted to the Jeep. And with it bolted in place, so that I know exactly where it's going to be, then I'll take that lower skid, which is this piece here, and I'll get the tabs on this bent to match up with exactly where the bumper sits on the Jeep, and then I'll get this painted. But otherwise, the bumper is done. I really like the way it came out. I picked this bumper just because I thought not only as a DIY project is it kind of fun, but also I really like the kind of basic simple lines that this has, and I think it turned out pretty good. I also got the harnesses soldered onto the ends of the lights, so they plug directly into the fog light harness on the Jeep, and I got those tested and those work well too, so those will get mounted in the bumper. So I'll get that last little bit taken care of, and I'll come back when I'm done and show you what the final product looks like. So there you have it, all finished, painted, and mounted. And you can just see at the bottom here, I do have the skid plate mounted. My winch is mounted, wired, and working. I just have to put the rope on it, but it's all mounted, ready to go. And for a license plate mount, I went with the Warrior Products mount. It's kind of a quick release mount so that you can pull the plate off to access the winch if needed. I painted it a color called Hammered Black, and it actually came out kind of looking more like a really dark gray, which I think fits really well because it matches the stock plastic fenders and rear bumper, just in terms of kind of overall color tone. And since the Jeep is mostly stock, I like it that way. I like that it kind of fits in with just the overall look of the Jeep. It doesn't stand out, draw attention. It just kind of looks like it's supposed to be there. Now obviously it's an aftermarket bumper with a winch and a bar on it and all that, but still it just kind of it's somewhat subdued and not real flashy, and that's kind of the style I was going for. So that's pretty much it for this video, I suppose. I realize it wasn't an in-depth how-to or even a review of the bumper, though I am happy with it. What it came with, how it went together, how it turned out. I'm pleased with it. So I guess that's the review. But really, I just kind of wanted to share the project and show it, and there's not really a lot of videos about this bumper online as it is, so I just thought, well, hey, if anybody's interested in it, maybe this one will come up. They'll get to see, what it looks like, how it kind of goes together, and what the results are. But like I said, I guess that's it for this video. Hopefully somebody found it interesting or helpful. If you have any questions or anything, post them up down below. As always, thank you for watching. Take care.